Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, your home for Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. You can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh, or anywhere you get your podcast from. I'm your host, Nick Belsky, joined as always by Nick Horwat. We got a great show for you guys today. The first thing we're going to talk about, and it's something I'm very excited to dive into with you, Horwat, is will there be a goaltending battle at Penguins training camp? We've seen Alex Nedeljkovic already back in town, already getting set and ramped up for the 2024-25 season. Will he get an opportunity to become the 1A in Pittsburgh if we do indeed have a 1A, 1B situation? And then there's one potential option left for the Penguins to upgrade their roster. At least there's one obvious option left. Will they be able to follow in the St. Louis Blues footsteps? We'll discuss that a little bit later and then close things out as we try to do every week. Haven't done recently, but as we're going to try to do every week, we'll close things out with our weekly Pens poll. Let's get started. And let's start things off with the most important position. Would you say goaltending is the most important position for the Penguins going into the 2024-25 season?
Well, I mean, more than just going into the upcoming season for the Penguins, if you ask Jeff Merrick, who is still looking for a job, it seems, he says you should just rename the sport goalie because it is just the most important position in the entire sport. So, yeah, I would say in any given situation, most teams will look at their goaltending battle or situation as one of the more important spots going into any given season. A lot of teams usually just have their situation organized. As for the Penguins, it's not organized, and you could say because of that, it's going to be one of the most important areas to pay attention to, especially early on in the season, especially as things go on, because we see how it all went last year. It seems like it's going to be the same situation this year with an added element to it, which I'm sure we'll get into.
Yeah, obviously, if you don't have it figured out, it's one of the things that every offseason you want to have figured out. I mean, there's some teams that are lucky, like the Florida Panthers, who, they overpaid for them, but it worked out. They won a Stanley Cup. They got Sergei Bobrovsky. There's teams like Tampa who have Andrei Vasilevsky. I mean, the Rangers have been blessed for decades. They had Henrik Lundqvist, and now they have Igor Shesterkin. The Penguins, they've been trying to figure things out ever since Marc-Andre Fleury walked out the door. Matt Murray wasn't the answer. Tristan Jarry isn't looking like the answer. Could it be Alex Nedeljkovic? He's back in town, doing a little bit of training, doing some social media videos as well for the Penguins on their social channels. He was re-signed this offseason to a 2-year extension, $2.5 million, which is not a small amount. It kind of lends to the fact that they believe he is more than just a straight backup. And according to the article written yesterday from Pens Inside Scoop's Michelle Crecchiolo, Nedeljkovic was told by Dubas that, quote, nothing will be given to anybody, kind of leaning towards goalie competition between Nedeljkovic and, of course, the $5 million goaltender that was previously mentioned in Tristan Jarry. My question to you, Horwat, is do you see a world where Nedeljkovic can earn that starting job early in the season or really even in training camp?
I do. And it's all started last season. It all started with the end of last season and that stretch run where Nedeljkovic was given, I think it was 13 straight starts to end the year. Even in the useless game 82, where by all means, you could have put Jarry in to let him finish out the season, maybe let him finish on a strong note. No, they still stuck with Alex Nedeljkovic, even after all the work he had put in, gotten them pretty close and fell short. It all started then. Going into that, starting the offseason there, a lot of the question was, well, is Jarry even going to be back? Is Nedeljkovic also going to be back? He only had a 1-year deal. What exactly does the future hold for both of them? And I think a lot of the discussion turned into, well, let's let the Penguins find a way to keep Nedeljkovic around and then deal Jarry. So that essentially he turned into the number one goalie right then and there. So because there's been no games since, no one's been able to see the process of where things stand with the goalie situation since game 82 against the Islanders. At the moment, yeah, it's Ned's net to lose almost. It's going to be really interesting going in, like in the way if Kyle Dubas said nothing is earned or nothing is given to you. Yeah, it's the way it should be for everyone always. But more so for this goalie situation with, like I said, it's gonna be fascinating to watch anyway. But I would say at this moment, because of the way the season ended, it's gonna be Ned first, Jari second, but close, just because of everything that Jari had put into the season, everything that Jari had done previously. Just that 13-game run, man. It's hard to ignore that, especially if that's the last 13 games the Penguins have played.
Yeah, no, I understand that, but essentially, I don't want to misquote you, but essentially saying that Ned's the leader in the clubhouse to be the 1A or the one, the starter or the 1A or whatever. I don't know, man. I mean, I understand. Last 13 games of last season, it was Ned's net, and there have been reports that the Penguins were very unhappy with the way Tristan Jarry fell apart post All-Star break, and probably because it's happened on multiple occasions at this point in his career, but you start fresh. I feel like you look at that last 13 games, it's riding the hot hand. At this point, there's no hot hands. You're going into a season. And I will say, when it comes to who has shown to have the higher ceiling, it is Jarry. So I can see them saying, well, if he has the higher ceiling and he's always been good out of camp, remember this, he's always gotten off the hot starts. I could still see them saying, all right, well, it's still Jarry's net to lose, not to mention the fact that he's a $5 million goaltender. So I'm a little surprised that you would say that it's Ned's, net to lose going into the thing. I could see it being a competition for sure, but I still think it's tough to unseed somebody with that contract. Do I think that it's a simple starter backup situation? No, I don't think Tristan Jarry has earned that right. I think it's automatically a 1A, 1B, but I would have to imagine that, considering the view and the trust that they put in Tristan Jarry last year, I understand it was bad, and I understand that there are a lot of questions left to be answered. I would still think that they would give Jarry the benefit of the doubt and give him the first crack at things, considering where they're at and almost having to do it with the contract situation at hand.
I do still firmly believe it's a competition. I'll at least
start
there. I think it's going to be competition between the two of them. Let's pull some Mike Tomlinisms out here for this. I would say that going into camp, they both are fighting for a starting job. That's what Jarry and Nedeljkovic are doing. I just would say at the moment, and here it comes, Nedeljkovic has the pole position. Leave it at that. I think that's where it is, but it is an easy spot to lose, especially when it is Tristan Jarry coming in with that contract, with that previous experience with the team, and with that momentum that he could just gain back. So I would say it's just an open competition straight up. Like, they're both at the starting line. Maybe Nedeljkovic just has the slightest of edges in that quote unquote pole position. I like that one, by the way. That's a good one. I think we can use that one more often.
That phrase is making my stomach turn right now, Horwat, just because obviously, as somebody who day to day has to discuss this Steelers quarterback competition, I'm tired of hearing it. I'm tired of hearing the word pole position, the dreaded term of pole position, because it gets misconstrued and pulled in every which way. But yes, it is fitting for this scenario.
Yep.
The one thing that I look at with Nedeljkovic last season, and yes, towards the end, 8-1-2 or 8-1-3 in the last 13 games, he brought them right up to a playoff spot, just couldn't get them over the hump. When you look at his numbers, yeah, overall, they were a little underwhelming, especially when you look at that last stretch where he had an under 900 save percentage towards the end. But when you look at his overall season, if you take out post All-Star break to him stepping in Dallas whenever Jarry was pulled, which that was the worst stretch by far by the entire team. So yes, Nedeljkovic's numbers, they reflect that. He had an 868 save percentage over those games and a 2-3-1 record. But again, everybody was horrendous. You take out that stretch from February to mid-March, before and after, 30 games played for Nedeljkovic, 16-4-6 record, a 909 save percentage, a 256 goals against average, which is good for 9th in the National Hockey League if he would have had that over an entire season. That's what you want out of a 1A. So to say that he can't do it would be incorrect. So I have faith in Alex Nedeljkovic. I think the question is, do the Penguins have enough faith in him to have him get the bulk majority of the starts, or at least the majority of the starts? Doesn't have to be the bulk majority, but the majority of the starts over Tristan Jarry, who they're paying $5+ million to over the next, 4 more seasons.
Something like that. We'll see how the season progresses. The Penguins are in that weird state of maybe if you're not nailed down to a Sidney Crosby, to your name of Sidney Crosby, you're maybe on the move too, because anything is possible. And don't forget that Joe Blomqvist is also waiting in the wings. There's a third player to enter this competition, sort of. There's a third name to keep an eye on and to see if he is able to come in and shake things up, ruffle some feathers, and make this thoroughly interesting. I think for now it's going to be Jari Nedeljkovic as a 1-2 combo to start the season, but anything can happen. It's sure to be an interesting season around the league. Let's say certain teams have goaltenders that fall apart.
Yeah.
All right, well, here's a partially used, certified pre-owned Tristan Jarry for you. And now, with his, because he would be the bigger name to trade, obviously, unless Nedeljkovic is pulling away and the Penguins are just committing to one way or the other. The interesting part of it, too, is Tristan Jarry isn't, and this is where it gets philosophical and then it starts to get weird, isn't a Kyle Dubas guy, Dubas brought in Nedeljkovic on the 1-year show-me deal and then signed him for 2 more years. Jarry had been here and if Dubas is trying to build the team in his image, sort of, and
Dubas handed him a 5-year contract last offseason. I understand there were mitigating circumstances. There was a limited amount of options available, but he signed him to a 5-year contract.
Yeah.
So regardless of whether or not Dubas wanted him to be the guy, Dubas's name is attached to that deal forevermore.
Yeah, good point there. That's a solid point. Thank you for bringing that part up. That's definitely certain. Yeah, maybe there just wasn't any other options out there. He was the best available free agent, and that was the kind of contract you had to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
If he wanted to build the team in his image, he would have done something last season. Okay, fair enough. Just the way that even into year 2 of Dubas, he's still making big and many changes to the lineup and front office. Boy, oh boy, did the amount of names coming in yesterday for the front office.
Yeah. Congratulations to the dozen people who got either hired or promoted by the Penguins yesterday. But the goaltending situation, I'll give you this. He's handed Nedeljkovic 2 contracts on separate occasions versus only 1 for Jarry. So maybe, even it out. 3 years of contracts for Jarry, or 3 years for Ned, 5 years for Jarry. It's getting even. But at the end of the day, when I look at Alex Nedeljkovic, and I think that's the crux of this entire conversation, is can he do it if given the opportunity to be a 1A or even a bona fide starter? I don't see him as an all-star, but it's hard to argue that he doesn't deserve a shot to go out there and prove it. I mean, last year was a prove me deal to see if he's an NHL goaltender, and he is far and away certainly a guy that can win you games and certainly a guy that can really hold down the fort. But at the same time, he's not a guy that I think can win you series yet. And that's what he needs to prove this season. And hey, he proved me wrong last season. He can prove me wrong again this season, and I would be A-okay with that. Let's move over and talk about a situation that is still unfolding in the National Hockey League, but it is going to be coming to a close either later today or tomorrow. I can't remember exactly when, but the St. Louis Blues pulled out one of those things that general managers rarely like to pull out, and that is the offer sheet. The Blues primed to sign at least one RFA off the Edmonton Oilers. They offer sheeted both Dylan Holloway and Philip Broberg last week. The Oilers, in exchange, have traded for Vasily Podkolzin of the Vancouver Canucks, and then they traded away Cody Ceci and attached, I believe, a 3rd or a 2nd-round pick to get rid of him. Seems like one of those players, Broberg, likely is going to come back, and Holloway's probably going to be allowed to go over to the Blues. And why does that matter to the Penguins? Well, because it outlines something that they could do themselves here in the coming weeks. Kelsey Surmatz of the Hockey News posed an interesting idea last week, and I wanted to kind of toss it around here with you, Horwat. The Penguins are in a rebuild, clearly, but they could still use a young, dynamic forward that could both be good now and into the future. And I understand those do not grow on trees. Those are not typically available. But then there's the situation in Toronto with Nick Robertson. 22 years old, restricted free agent. He requested a trade a month or 2 ago from Toronto, has high offensive upside, 14 goals in 2023, not much defensively. So the question I pose to you is simple. Should the Penguins consider offer sheeting Nick Robertson.
Let me hit my button. It is always worth the consideration. I'd say that goes for plenty of players where they're still sitting around as RFAs. There's a ton of RFAs still sitting around, but none of them seem reasonable. Like Jeremy Swayman's still an RFA. I think Seth Jarvis is still without a contract. Not Seth Jarvis. I think him too, actually. Matty Beniers, Moritz Seider, and Lucas Raymond with the Red Wings. Like, there's a ton of names that are still RFAs, but none of them make sense to offer sheet. That's what made the St. Louis Blues situation kind of unique, is that those two, Philip Broberg and Dylan Holloway, who knows if the Oilers are really clinging to them. Of course, last update from Friedman, everything will be settled by the time this episode is out. That the Blues will likely be taking them both, so we'll see where that goes. And obviously, by the time you listen to this, you'll know. But for the Penguins and Nicholas Robertson, it's always worth the consideration and the discussions of, well, how much would it cost? What would the compensation be? Would it make the Penguins a better team? And that connection, you cannot let go of that connection of Dubas and the Maple Leafs in any sort of situation. And this is another one where Kyle Dubas knows Nicholas Robertson from previous regimes, drafted him, and probably scouted him beforehand and knows what he's capable of, and probably knows he hasn't been getting, I don't want to say not getting proper opportunity in Toronto, but maybe is deserving of more as he's only 22, should be 23 soon, and has a ton of room to grow. I mean, you're not going to sit here and say he can grow into his brother, Jason, who's 40, 50 goal scorer, but maybe has more to give than what he's already shown, which is in 87 career games played, 34 points.
Yeah, Robertson is kind of in that, to bring it to Penguins terms. A couple years ago, Alex Nylander was a player that everybody thought deserved more opportunities, but because he had a contract that was, waiver eligible, or where he didn't need to go through waivers, he was shipped back and forth. If they needed a roster spot, if they needed some cap relief, he was always the guy that was driving from Pittsburgh to Wilkes-Barre to Pittsburgh to Wilkes-Barre. That was Nick Robertson. The only thing is he didn't have to drive very far to go to the Toronto Marlies. He was the guy that whenever they needed to send somebody down, hey, he doesn't have to go through waivers, so we're just going to send down Nick Robertson. He played 11 games at the AHL level last year, and he wants more of an opportunity. Now, will he get that in Pittsburgh? That's a question here, because they've loaded up on a lot of near NHL ready young guys, not to mention bringing in guys like Blake Lizotte, who might shift over to the left side, a guy like Anthony Beauvillier, who they're hoping will play significant ice time this year for the Penguins. But what I feel with Robertson is this. While they've added a lot of young talent, and they have, I mean, the Penguins, we've talked ad nauseum about guys like Koivunen, guys like Vasily Ponomarev, guys like, even Braden Yeager, who's a couple years off still, or maybe even a year and a half off still, but a lot of young talent has been infused into the organization, but none of them are as proven or NHL ready as Nick Robertson already is. And he's 23 years old, or he's 22 now. He's going to be 23 in September. I would imagine the contract is not going to cost you all that much, because right now his qualifying offer from Toronto is $813,000. You offer him somewhere between $1 and $2 million for a couple of years. If he's okay with that and he wants to get a fresh start in Pittsburgh, you can get that deal done, and it's going to cost you a third-round pick, something of which the Penguins have stocked up on mightily throughout this offseason. I don't see a reason why not to, because, like I mentioned, I like the young talent they've brought in. I think that there's a chance that a couple of them end up being really good players for the Penguins this year and into the future. But I still think Nick Robertson is a level above a lot of them, and he's more proven than a lot of them, and you're not taking as much of a gamble. So a third-round pick for Nick Robertson in that type of contract, I would take it 10 times out of 10.
Yeah, the Penguins have just over $1 million worth of cap space to spend.
But they can send somebody down.
And I believe that's still counting Matt Nieto's contract, which will...
I think they took it off on Puckpedia, if that's what you're looking at.
So. That's exactly what I'm looking at. He's already listed as IR, so I don't know how the website works totally yet. We need to see it in season form. But the Penguins also have 3 third-round picks to spend. 3. How many teams have 3 picks in a round at any given time? I mean,
well,
Yeah, the Boston Bruins famously one time, but that being said, the Penguins can easily ship one of those out for something like this and still have money to maneuver around for something like this. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right. It's always worth the opportunity. It's always worth the try. And worst comes to worst, what? The Leafs sign him and he stays in a situation he probably doesn't want to be in?
Yeah, you expedite a process that's been slowly dragging along all offseason.
Yeah, if anything, more offer sheets should be sent out just to get people moving on the deals that they need to make.
Yeah, I mean,
they don't need to do that.
Just typically, like, I'm pro player, so get your money. And typically offer sheets are worth more than the team that they're already on is willing to pay, which is why this typically happens. I mean, you see what the offers were to Broberg and Holloway from Edmonton before the offer sheets, and then you see what the offer sheets were. It was 2 times or 3 times the money and a year or 2 more in each instance. So maybe I'm thinking a little unrealistically about maybe a 3-year deal worth $1.5 million for Nick Robertson, who's, again, 23 years old, supremely talented in the offensive zone. He is a little bit of a rough skater, and he doesn't do much in the defensive zone, but you're going into a rebuild. Get as many goal scorers as you possibly can. This is a guy that I think fits into your middle six. And honestly, I understand we like bunting with Malkin, but Robertson and Malkin might not be a bad thing, right? Malkin can create those opportunities. Robertson can finish them. Or, God forbid, you find somebody for Sidney Crosby. Like, I like Drew O'Connor. And I think Drew O'Connor is a decent mold for Nick Robertson when it comes to the age. But again, different skill sets, different style of player. Drew O'Connor's more complete, more all around. Nick Robertson is an all gas, no breaks guy. I think if you give that type of option to the left side, I think it's a great thing for the Penguins for the next couple of years, especially going into a rebuild where you just need to take chances on younger players. If you overpay, and again, 1.5 is not going to really be an overpay if this guy works out. If you overpay for him and lose a 3rd round pick, I'm okay with that. Now, again, if it goes over that 2.1 million, I think that's the next level. 2.1 million turns it into a 2nd round pick. That one's tougher to swallow, but at the same time, you're essentially drafting Nick Robertson at 23 with your 2nd round pick. They don't have one next season, so they'd have to do some maneuvering, but your 2nd round pick in 2026, because that might be what ends up being the case. I don't know if you can do that and you can push it to the next year. They might have to acquire a second, but as we saw with the Penguins and the Blues, sometimes a deal can be swung to make sure you have the capital in order to do it. So I feel like it is a no doubt decision in my mind. If the offer stands and if Robertson is open to it, you offer sheet him.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said the the rebuilding term, because you look at all of the, just the amount of different young names that the Penguins have in their arsenal that aren't even in the lineup. Mm-hmm. I mean, at what point do the Penguins see them? Because there's not a ton of wiggle room here. Anthony Beauvillier's in the lineup. Blake Lazat's going to be in the lineup. Cody Glass might be in the lineup. Mm-hmm. And then there's maybe Nola Chari's in the lineup. Kevin Hayes will be there. Lars Eller. There's no room for nuance in this lineup where you can maybe put in a Sam Poulin who's still around, Vasily Ponomarev, or the other name that's escaped me. Now, let's say you acquire a Nick Robertson. Where does he fill in there somewhere? Yeah. At some point,
it gets busy.
It's a little busy, and if you're still committed to winning now, okay, maybe you don't touch the Nick Robertson thing and you try and fly in with the roster you have. But if you're committing to a rebuild at some point too, all right, well, go for it. Go for Nick Robertson and start selling these pieces that are not budging, i.e. Ricard Raquel. Are we in the last year of Kevin Hayes?
I believe he has 1 year left. Yeah.
Well, then, hey, let that one roll. Find a trade partner for Lars Eller. Get Polachari out somehow. If you're committing to the young guys, which I mean, man, have we not been screaming from the mountaintops to get for the Penguins to commit to the young guys since the Jim Rutherford era? Mm-hmm. And yet here we are. Yeah, it's hard, it's tough, but it just depends on what direction the Penguins want to go, and they have plenty of young faces that a rebuild could be decent. The prospect pool isn't that great. It's not over the top spectacular to where we're again continuing to scream just commit to the young guys.
Yeah, it's thin. Is the problem. There is some talent there, but it's thin.
Yeah, and no one is really sure how much they can project out. Also, this whole thing of Braden Yeager just signed a deal. Maybe he's good enough. Like
again, Yeah. Yeah. I see where you're going, but
There's a
Jaeger,
lot
I'm
of
not pushing.
faces. Yeah, there's a lot of faces that can fill into this NHL lineup
Mhm.
within the next year or two. How about that? There's your commitment.
Yeah.
Then, if that's the case, all right, what's Rickard Rakell still doing here? Why did we get Kevin Hayes? Why is Lars Eller still here? Nola Chari. There's all kind of different options that the Penguins can go in
Mhm.
that, oof, I don't know. It's a weird log jam that I keep saying there's good problems to have. This is an interesting one. This one's in between
Yeah.
because you want to add players like that to bolster your lineup, but also how much can you go for it with a guy like Nick Robertson?
Yeah, and there's also the discussion of will the Toronto Maple Leafs just want to trade him in general? And at that point, what are you trading for him? Probably a third round pick.
Yep.
So you can just expedite this process. At the end of the day, when I look at it, do you like Valtteri Puustinen? Yes or no? Simple. Do you like him?
Yeah, I do. And actually, I'd say he's part of that little group of players that's a young player that can move on with this team.
Yeah, Robertson is a higher level Valtteri Puustinen. That's
Ooh,
what he is. He is a upgraded version of Valtteri Puustinen, but he plays the left side, and Puustinen, I believe, plays the right.
that's what he's listed as.
So that's, again, I would add that. Personally, I would add that. Let's finish things off with our weekly Pens poll here. This is something that, I threw it out there because there have been a lot of people that have this discussion about, who do you not trust among the Penguins stars, among the Penguins big three and or core, however you describe it. The big three is obviously something of itself. Everybody's thrown in, is Erik Karlsson there or not? Either way, he is among the best four players on the Penguins. So I threw this out there yesterday, and I was intrigued because there's people that say, it's an aging core. I don't think they can do it anymore. Whose performance are you most concerned about heading into the 2024-25 season? We put it out there on X, formerly known as Twitter, and here are the results. Evgeny Malkin, 44%. At one point here, and it was not early. Like, it was early, but it also it expanded throughout the day. Evgeny Malkin was at like 77%. So the early voters were not big on Evgeny Malkin, but at the end of the day, Evgeny Malkin, 44%. Chris Letang, 31%. Erik Karlsson, 22%. And Sidney Crosby got 3% of the vote, which I was just interested to see if anybody is concerned about Sidney Crosby outside of the whole contract situation. Horwat, where do you stand on this? Whose performance are you most concerned about?
I don't know. It's tough. If I look at it, and the issue, I'd say I'm taking Crosby and Karlsson out of this conversation. Those two I'm not super concerned about. I think Karlsson's going to have a much better year because of learned the system a bit, got his feet wet, and now has a good buddy behind the bench for him. I'd be torn between Malkin and Letang and might lean into Letang because of what we saw last year. I get he was injured with a myriad of problems, but also if Erik Karlsson is going to have an improved season, Chris Letang might look like he's taking a step back just by comparison. And I think that's sort of what, he might be facing. Just the aging process, the injury process, and taking those slow steps back. I'm almost expecting Malkin to take a step back sometime, by the way. That's also part of, in my head, where Malkin's aging. Sure, he's going to do good. I'm also at the point of, I wouldn't be shocked if he put up a 30-point season. That would have sucked. That'd be terrible and not fun to see. And a bit of an exaggeration, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
But if those declines start happening for Malkin, I'm going to go, yeah, he's 39. Like, he's already started talking about playing a year in the KHL. We are all well aware Malkin's the first one to leave the NHL out of these three.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Chris Letang, he's got a ton of years left. If he starts taking the steps back or looks to be declining in comparison to Erik Karlsson, yeah, that's where my concerns are going to draw the most. So out of it, I'm going to say Chris Letang.
Yeah, I had the similar thought process because as you kind of alluded to there, he's going to get the short end of the stick in every single situation on the defensive zone, right? He's going to have more PK time. He's going to have less offensive zone starts. He's going to have, the worst of the two partners always. You're not going to see Marcus Pettersson get a whole lot of ice time with Chris Letang. And if you do, something has gone either horribly wrong or I guess it could have gone horribly right where Matt Grzelcyk or Ryan Graves is that good to where you can promote them. But again, which one's more realistic from standing here right now? It's more realistic that something would have had to gone horribly wrong for us to see Pettersson alongside Chris Letang. So likely he's going to have the worst of the two partners throughout this entire season. Not to mention he's coming off of 2 tough seasons physically. You mentioned his myriad of injuries that he suffered last year despite playing 82 games. How about a year prior to that, he had a stroke, right?
Yep.
He's had 2 really tough physical seasons, not to mention an off-season surgery that he's rehabbed all year long. I understand it is a hand surgery, so it's not going to change his conditioning. It shouldn't change his, his legs, which is the first thing to go, as everybody likes to discuss with Evgeny Malkin. But that is going to affect some things when it comes to, potentially stick handling. We'll have to wait and see what he looks like when he gets back to Pittsburgh, what he looks like when he gets back on the ice. But I also understand where people are coming from with Evgeny Malkin, because physically, when you watched the games last season, he is the only one that took a major step back from what you used to expect from Evgeny Malkin. But as I have been harping on all offseason, he's still one of the best second-line centers in hockey. And I understand there's no more improving for Evgeny Malkin. He's not going to hit another level up, but that doesn't mean he has to hit a level down. Right? There are chances that even if you regress, you plateau at certain points. It's not a straight regression every single time, especially with a player of his caliber. I think Malkin is set up for a better season because I think he's set up for better line mates. I think he is set up with another full off season where he's been healthy. I'm not going to say he's going to go out there and put up another point per game season. I'm not going to say he's going to go out there and play all 82 again, because for 3 straight seasons, that's a hard one to be able to sit here and put my money on. But I think of the 2 of them, I agree with you. It's Chris Letang, because there are some unknowns with Chris Letang, and he has played at such a high level, but I also think he is set up in a worse position than Evgeny Malkin is going into the 24-25 season. Again, in an ideal world, we're not talking about any of this at the end of the year. We're saying, oh, well, all 4 played pretty much to the level. We didn't have to be concerned about anything. But at the same time, again, there is some expectation when you're dealing with 39-year-olds and 38-year-olds and 37-year-olds. And then Erik Karlsson, who's 34 now, there is some expectation that there could be some concerning play at some point in time, especially for a team that's missed the postseason the past 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah, and the aging process doesn't help anyone.
No.
There's going to be fair concerns for all 4 of these names. There really are. And for one of them, the concern is a bit more off the ice than it is on. I think we all know what I'm saying. But that concern should wrap up pretty quickly, hopefully. Yeah. As for the other 3, there's going to be the aging process. There's going to be the genuine concerns of also, what does every Yinzer like to shout about when it comes to guys like Malkin or Letang? Well, they're in the shadow of Sidney Crosby. So if you're not perfect like him, you're going to get all of the backlash. You're going to get all of the rage-fueled comments. They've been drowning out that noise for 18, 19 years. It helps that they've won quite a bit through that. But man, with each passing season, does it get, I don't want to say it gets louder, it kind of quiet, dampered down a bit whenever they signed extensions. But, it's a smart fan base. It is a smart fan base. They can see when players are starting to regress. Let's just be honest, that's what they're doing. But they have to fight it off as much as possible. And when it comes to the concerns, again, you almost expect it from Malkin. Letang, you don't quite yet. But we'll see where it goes. And then being compared to Karlsson along the way isn't going to help him.
Yeah. And the only other thing, too, is how did last season end for Letang? I understand there were injuries, but it didn't look pretty. Nope. It did not look pretty. So you're hoping that you get early season Letang all season in 2024-25. And again, these are supremely talented players, and the Penguins' success rests on all 4 of them, which I don't think is great either, right? You're putting a lot of weight on the shoulders of these 4 guys who are, as we're talking about, guys that were fighting off Father Time actively every single season. And that's where I understand a little bit of the 3% for Crosby, because if he is not perfect, like everybody just assumes he's going to be, the Penguins probably don't reach their goals, whatever those goals are. Dubas is saying that, we don't want to be a team that just sneaks into the playoffs. We want to be a team, we want to return this to being a contender before these guys retire. If Crosby's not perfect, they're not going to reach whatever goals they set out for themselves, whether that's playoffs, whether that's winning a series, whether that's simply being a bubble team. I don't know what I would assume the goal is to make the playoffs and make some noise. If Crosby is not picture perfect for 82 games, the team on paper looks like it's going to struggle to get there. So I can see that to a certain extent. Again, not really concerned about Crosby, and still not personally concerned about the contract either. But That's just me. That's going to do it for this episode of The Tip of the Iceberg. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this one. Remember, you can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Iceberg or anywhere you get your podcast from. We'll see you guys next time.